Hi, everybody. My name is Brianna Hill, and I'm a probation officer with Dakota County.
I am Brandon Head. I'm a program coordinator with Dakota County.
And we're here today to share with you our presentation about Dakota County Community Corrections. We're going to give you an overview of what probation is like, how our system has changed over time, and how you can prepare for a future in community corrections. Brandon, would you like to go ahead and get started?
Sure. So again, Brandon Head. My current position is a program coordinator working with volunteers and interns. So students like yourselves who are looking to get into our field. My job is to help you guys navigate that system, working with both yourselves and your professors to help you get a position in Dakota County where you will be working side by side with a probation officer. I've been with Dakota County for 12 years. I was a probation officer in the adult domestic abuse unit for about 5 years. So I've been both a juvenile and an adult probation officer in the past.
All right, and my name is Brianna Hill again, and I have been in Dakota County for 11 years now. I am currently a high-risk probation officer, and as we go through the presentation, I can show how I've kind of gone through the different levels of types of probation roles. And I started out as a paid intern, so I'm sure some of you would be interested in hearing about how that process started. I love what I do, and then outside of Dakota County, I'm very involved in many other activities. I'm also a student myself at Concordia University in my doctorate program. And so again, our objectives today are just to give you an overview of community corrections in Dakota County. This may be very similar to other counties as well. We're going to again talk about how the system has changed over time in terms of philosophy, and then how you can prepare for future in community corrections. So what we have here is our organizational chart, and it breaks down kind of where we are at in terms of the flow of how the county works. So as you can see at the top, we have the County Board of Commissioners, and then it moves down to the administrators, and then on the communications end and going straight down under community services, you have community corrections, and that is where we are. So we have you are here because that is where we are in the grand scheme of things. In addition to community services and where we're landing or where we are set, there's also social services, veteran services, employment and economic assistance, and public health and extension services as well. Our mission here at Dakota County is supporting positive change in individual lives to promote healthy, safe, and thriving communities. All right, and then this is a typical structure or format or flow, should you say, of what it's like for someone to come into the criminal justice system here in Dakota County. And it starts from arrest and it'll end at discharging from probation. So as you can see, there's an offense that's committed, and I'll use a formerly popular example, Rihanna and Chris Brown. They got into a domestic altercation. So in that situation, Chris Brown would have gotten arrested. He probably went to jail and then had a pretrial bail hearing or evaluation completed, and then was probably offered some form of conditional release, and that's when they pay bail to get out of jail with conditions. And then the case would turn into an official case or official charges according to the county attorney's office. And then throughout the court process, which would take quite some time, this process does not go by fast, is that eventually the goal is to get you to come to a plea agreement or potentially go to jury trial if you're going to plead not guilty. After that process, if you end up pleading guilty or you have some discrepancy in that process, the judge may or may not order a pre-sentence investigation. It's typically done, but not on every case. And then after your pre-sentence investigation, assuming that you've come to some sort of plea deal or agreement, there's sentencing at the court hearing, and then you are assigned to probation. And then after you spend your term on probation and come to successful completion, then you are discharged from probation. And with probation, there are different levels or different types of probation officers. We are not as seen on TV. You might think that we walk around in bulletproof vests and carry guns. We do not do that here in Minnesota. There are some states that do go that live, what I would say, but we don't do that here. Some may wear vests or whatnot. Some may have a permit to carry, but it is not required nor expected for probation officers here. But in the terms of the process and how to get started, with clients coming into our system, this is kind of what they're going to see. And again, these are just the different roles that we play in probation. So the first one is the pretrial bail evaluations, or what we call our intake unit. And so those evaluations are done in the jail or at the time of arrest. And that information gets sent to the court for the judge to decide if there's going to be any sort of release for the client. Intake involves a lot of pre and post sentencing work done on the case. Immediately after sentencing, a PRM, which is a prior record memo or like a criminal history check, and it also includes a criminal history score, according to the MSGs, which are the Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines. So all of those pieces that I just mentioned, including the pretrial bail evaluations, are part of the intake unit. Next, we have the pre-sentence investigations unit, or PSI. You may have heard about those in your books, in your textbooks. And pre-sentence investigations, those are done before sentencing. And it's kind of like, and I used to write those, and so did Brandon as well. He can chime in at any time about this, but kind of like writing a psychological evaluation minus the diagnosis. I don't know, would you agree with that, Brandon?
I would. You're really doing an investigative process, working with not only the individual who committed the crime, but potentially with the victim. You're gathering all that input to put together. And in that PSI, you're also going to be making formal recommendations to the court with regard to sentencing as well.
Exactly. And oftentimes the judge will go with our recommendations from probation. And that can include probation term, that could include a jail term, and it could also include a prison term. All right, further down, we have the supervision agent, and there's different types of levels of supervision, such as administrative or what we call paper probation. There's low and medium risk, which is the probation service center, also known as group supervision. And then there's traditional high risk supervision. And then there's intensive supervised release, or what we also know as ISR. That's for clients coming straight out of prison. And additionally, we also have specialized caseloads within the traditional and even the medium to low risk groups. But those include high risk, which is a gamut of a wider range of crimes that be committed. It could be drug charges, theft charges, assault charges. It can include a wide range. We also have a sex offender unit. We have intensive units for those that are extremely high risk cases. Then we have gender specific, which is our female only. And then mental health, we have a mental health caseload, and DWI caseload, drug court caseload, and domestic abuse as well. Am I missing any of them?
I don't think so. I'd say the biggest takeaway from this slide is just the wide range of opportunities within probation as a probation officer. There are so many different types of opportunities within that probation officer title. There's definitely a big difference between, say, a probation officer who writes pre-sentence investigations and a supervision agent. So there's really that opportunity to see where your interests are and really try and tailor a good fit for you. And you really aren't going to know that until you get in there and you get your feet wet and you do that internship or that shadow opportunity or volunteer opportunity, whatever that looks like for you. But that's a great opportunity to see where your personal preference plays into what type of PO you might want to be.
Exactly. And with that part too, in addition to the internship, what Brandon is able to do, and he'll explain this a lot later, is that you can actually get a taste of all of this while you're on your internship or your volunteer term.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
All right. And just to touch base really quick too, personally, I have been in the intake unit, I have been in the PSI unit, and I currently am a high risk supervision agent. So I have been through the different levels of probation.
Which is important because it gives you a perspective of how those other positions work and how the system as a whole works together. So it's both Brianna and I, both of us did that in different units over the years, and it really gave us a better understanding, big picture about how the probation system operates.
Yeah, and not only that, the perspective of the client. So we now know how clients feel at the different levels of when they're entering into our system.
Right.
All right, the shift. So what this page is about here, this slide, is about how we have moved from a previous authoritative philosophical approach with working with clients to a more coaching or client-centered approach. And so as you can see on the authoritative side, it was more rooted in like a law enforcement style of engagement with clients. There was a lot more use of power and control among probation officers, or just the idea of that I'm the authority, you're the client, you listen to what I do or what I say, or tell you to do, excuse me. And then it was more focused on the probation officer and the conditions that need to be done for the client and what the agenda for the probation officer was. And so there is a term that one of our probation officer uses, and it's nail 'em, tail 'em, jail 'em. And that, you know, for some people that may still be the case, but for others, a lot of us have shifted far away from that authoritative approach, because we realized that according to best practices, that was not the way to work with clients. It wasn't the most effective, nor the most successful for our department or for the clients that we serve, with the population or the community.
And I'll add in there real quickly that with that shift that Brianna's talking about, that philosophy shift that Dakota County has gone through over the last few years, you'll hear us referring to the people we work with as clients. That was not always the case. Part of that shift is we've moved from calling them, the people we work with, offenders to clients. That word offender has a negative connotation with it, and you're already putting them at a disadvantage. So you give that person dignity, integrity. You're not stripping them of those things by calling them a client. So that's part of that shift that she's discussing right now.
Yes. And it was a hard shift for some of us to make because it was unfamiliar. We have been practicing this way for so long, but over time it became the way that we do things in Dakota County. And so I'm personally very glad that we made this shift.
Very positive.
Yeah, a very positive shift. It's a stress relief for probation officers and for the clients too. Then moving over to the coaching side, as I mentioned earlier, it's very client-centered. And I'm using that term client a lot now, as Brandon just mentioned, and there's also client autonomy. So instead of us trying to wrestle with a client and say, this is what you're going to do, we're asking them, what would you like to do first? What would you like to tackle first? And we make sure it makes sense in the sense of how things go and what we know in our wisdom as probation officers. But we're giving them more of a choice to choose how they want to proceed and how they want to do probation, essentially. We're also very heavily focused on, and we always have been as a county, evidence-based practices. And so we don't take that lightly. We practice those all the time, and we will go into further detail about what an evidence-based practice is later on in this presentation. We're really here to help facilitate client change. And so we are considered like change agents. And so we consider ourselves also as the intervention for a client coming into the system, is that our job is to intervene and to help them get back into the community in a most productive manner. In terms of softer skills approach, we're using a lot more social and psychological skills versus in the past where we might have used our own, what we grew up with skills, which don't work in probation. And so softer skills just meaning more people skills and using those coaching methods, those therapeutic approaches, motivational interviewing, and methods like that work a lot better for our clients. As a result, we're seeing a lot fewer violations because people are given more chances, or we're trying intermediate sanctions instead of just sending them back to court. And then we're also seeking to change or seeking the client's internal motivation that really leads to change.
So as you might gather, looking at this list, this is really a strength-based approach. This is looking at the strengths of that individual that you're working with and trying to figure out how to build upon those. Previously, it was more of almost a finger pointing. I'm going to get you, or you did this, or you did that. Now,
what you didn't do.
Right, or what you didn't do. That shift has now gone to looking for the strengths in that individual's lives and the things that they are doing right, and building upon that, and helping that individual see the worth that they have and the positive things that they have done. Yes. To help really engage them and to get them motivated. That internal motivation that was mentioned is key. Having them have the desire to do it versus someone else telling them to do it is a big difference, makes a big difference.
Yeah, and as an example of that is, I would say like working with a client now, if to me and said, and I might ask, when's the last time you've been using drugs or alcohol? And they would say, oh, I used last week. And I would get more specific and say, okay, well, how many days have you been sober? And they might say 3. Okay. Now, if you are someone like me who doesn't drink alcohol, do any of those things, 3 days doesn't sound like a long time. But in a strengths-based approach, we would actually highlight those 3 days. And we would say, that's excellent, because 3 days sober is not easy for someone that's using. And so we would focus on that to let the client know that we're here to support them with their positive change. And then we continue to build upon that so that they feel more motivated to want to say, you know what, I think I'm ready for treatment now. So there's been a big shift, whereas previously I might have been like, 3 days, okay, well, we need to get a UA today. We got to make you sign this document, and we got to we got to go back to court. And so now it's like, we throw that kind of way at as a very last resort, and now we're focused solely on that strength-based model. All right, so moving on into evidence-based practices and what we think you need to know. And so actually, Brandon, I'll switch it over to you to start with, or unless you want me to do this part, motivational interviewing.
Go ahead.
Okay. With motivational interviewing, this is a core skill that you will learn as a probation officer. Actually, the whole state of Minnesota, I believe, I think most probation officers in the state or most counties have trained their staff in motivational interviewing. It is something that has been proven over time to work with clients, and they focus on the core skills which are listed right here as open-ended questions, offering those affirmations, offering reflections, which essentially is just repeating what you hear a client say so that they know that you're listening and actively listening to them, and then summarizing what a client says. So if you have ever attended therapy, it's very much like a therapeutic session with a probation officer as it is with a client. So, or as if you were going to therapy. So it's a huge strength. It's a skill that we all have been trained in. Some of us teach motivational interviewing or have become trainers in it, but it is something that we have definitely shifted completely over to, and we can tell when we are using this skill and when we have stepped away from the spirit of motivational interviewing. There's a big difference. And so it's kind of like tottering back from that authoritative mode, going into the coaching mode. If you're not using the motivational interviewing skills or the methods, you're most likely going to go backwards with your client.
And part of the conversation that Brianna and I have when we're going into the classrooms, it's just encouraging students to get as well versed in this as you can. This is really across the state. The use of evidence-based practices is been adopted pretty universally. Dakota County in particular, we are all in on it. It's a skill set that the more well versed you are in that, the better you're going to do in an interview. The better you're going to do in the field, the better you're going to do while you're working with your clients. It's just a really important aspect of what we do. And this is a great time for you to take advantage of being in school and having that connection point to your professors to ask those questions, to request that information, to get, as like I said, as well versed as you can.
Exactly. Totally agree with that. And it's also a skill that a lot of us use on our family members as well. All right. And then we have cognitive skills programming. And we have more than just what I listed here, but we have different programs for adult and juvenile probation. And we didn't really mention the difference between the two, but we do have adult and juvenile probation agents. And so we both use cognitive skills programming. One of the main ones that we use is called Thinking for a Change. And the other main one that's very similar to this, is actually an adapted version of that program, is called Decision Points. And so probation officers are expected to know how to facilitate such programming. So we become trained not only in motivational interviewing, but to utilize those skills in our cognitive skills programming as well. And so Thinking for a Change and Decision Points are approximately 3-month-long programs. They're offered for free to our clients, and they're facilitated often by probation officers and sometimes other contracted agencies. We also have the Anger Response Program, which is done in juvenile services. And then I've sat in on a couple of those. I haven't trained in that, but it's really, really good. They use a sheet called a hassle log. And so the students there, or the juveniles, they get to use that sheet to talk about how they worked with their anger during the week or how they responded to a situation. And then for gender specific purposes, we also have a class called Moving On, or program, called Moving On. And that is designed solely for women. And so we have some agents who are in that particular gender specific unit who are well trained in the Moving On curriculum, and they teach that to their clients and other agents' clients as well. Cognitive skills programming is a major tool that we use, just like motivational interviewing. So just going back on what Brandon was saying is that it is imperative that you understand at least the terms of what these programs are, because it's not just Dakota County that uses these programs. These programs are starting to spread a lot throughout the state. So it's a very common language to know what a cognitive skills-based program is, or to say T4C, to use those acronyms, which that's another big deal too, acronyms. But it's a really good thing to know and have that in your toolkit, so to speak, when you're going for an interview or trying out for an internship.
Part of that understanding is that all of this conversation we're having right now, the EBP, evidence-based practices, is the umbrella term. The things we're discussing in detail right here, like the LSCMI, YLSCMI, these risk assessments, motivational interviewing, those different things, those are the actual tools that we are using to work with the clients. So evidence-based practices is more the big picture, and then the things we're discussing now are the actual tools that you're going to use. These are the practices that you use to actually implement it.
Exactly. And then next we have risk assessments. And this is another major tool that we use under that umbrella of EBP, or evidence-based practices, as well. And I wrote here risk assessments plus more, and I did that on purpose. So what you're seeing right here, this picture, is called the wall of recidivism. And that is used within the two primary assessments that we use, called the LSCMI and the YLSCMI. And the LSCMI stands for the Level of Service Case Management Inventory. And the Y on the other side just means for youth. So we have the adult one and the juvenile one. And so with this assessment, this is done usually often pre-trial, at the pre-trial stage or intake, and an assessment is completed where it's like a background check essentially, but it goes looking for risk factors, what we call the big 8. And so they're looking for these 8 risk factors to see where a client is at most risk to reoffend. And so our job as probation is to look at that grid, which is like this wall that you see right here, with these different levels and different labels on them. I would review that assessment with my client and go over the areas that have scored high risk or very high risk. And my role is to help them get that score down, because we want them to move to a lower level of supervision and get out probation as fast as possible. And most clients love hearing that part. They want to see an early discharge. And in order for us to do that, this score for this LSCMI on the adult side has to go down to a certain level.
So this is a part of that shift as well that we were discussing earlier. Back in the day, it was a situation where a probation officer would use that gut feeling, which we're moving away from, that gut feeling as to what level of supervision or what type of services an individual should get based on the offense that they committed. So if they committed a felony level offense, they automatically were on high level supervision, high level services, and then the opposite. If it was a low level offense, they were low level everything. That doesn't necessarily capture the person. The person
Exactly.
is who you want to address, not the crime. So this risk assessment, whether it be for the adult or the juvenile section, really dives into what the individual needs are to help that person become a productive, balanced member of society again, helping them get to a place where they can feel comfortable with where they are, what they're doing, and how they're going about living their lives.
Exactly. And so just to note some things here, I'm going to use my mouse here if you can see this, is that we're really looking at like the rewards of pro-social thinking and behavior. And we're trying to implement pro-social activities, pro-social thinking patterns and behaviors for clients so that they can enhance their experience in the community and be more productive as citizens. And so this assessment really does capture each area of their life and helps us to identify those hotspot areas where they need some assistance in terms of making some deeper changes. And so these assessments do a really good job at highlighting that and helping us help the client essentially leap over the wall of recidivism so that they can move on with their life and get off of probation.
And it's identifying those strong suits as well,
Yes.
and really allowing us to focus in. So if that individual's been employed for the last 3 years and their supervisor states they have done a great job, then that's something we want to capture. That's something that we want to highlight and really point that out to the individual that, hey, you've done a really great job. You're a star at work. You're really a huge asset to the company that you work with, regardless of what the company is. and then build upon that. How do we take those skill sets that are helping you do so well there and apply those to some of the areas where you're possibly struggling? So again, it can be a strength-based viewpoint that you use with the risk assessments as well.
Exactly. All right. Another new evidence-based practice that we are utilizing in Dakota County is the Dakota County practice model. And this is something newer within the last going on 4 years now. We were part of a group that trained with some officials and throughout the state, and we were able to develop our own practice model. And so you may be like, what in the world is a practice model, Bree and Brandon? And so practice model, essentially, the purpose behind it is to give probation officers a structure or like a roadmap on how to apply the principles of evidence-based practices to our daily supervision of clients. So essentially, this is like a wheel. And as you can see within the wheel, as I mentioned earlier, we talked about motivational interviewing right in the middle. And so we realized that motivational interviewing is something that we have to carry as like a thread throughout all of these different arenas of which we work within our clients. So for instance, professional alliance. This is typically when we are, essentially this just means that we're building a professional alliance with our clients, and we'll use terms like we're here to work with you. We're a team working together, and using those terms. We're also doing some role clarification, engagement, and focusing in that particular arena. So this is building rapport with our clients. And then moving over to the assessment range, we just mentioned that about those risk assessments that we talked about on the page previously. We also are training on how to give the best feedback to our clients, and then to target those risk and need areas, and then assess for the readiness for their readiness to change. And so we're looking, how ready are they to make a change or to make a leap in their life and do something different? How ready is a client who is using and has been chronically using illegal narcotics for a long time? How ready are they to make a change and go to treatment, or even just to go to a support group? So we work with our clients where they're at, and we use those assessments and evidence-based practices to really highlight that. Another section is change planning. So this is responsivity and collaborative goal setting. So again, those terms, we, together, you can do this, and it's very strength-based. But we're looking at what does change look like in their life, because that can be traumatic for a lot of clients. And so we talk about how we can respond as probation officers to them making the changes, and also how they can respond best to making such changes in their lives. And then finally, this fourth section here is the intervention. And this is where we implement those cognitive behavioral therapy programs. We make service referrals to the right agency. So if there's a client that has significant or even non-significant mental health issues, we might assign them to the case management or the mental health unit and assign them to a case manager. We might do a combination of things. We might have a few of these interventions going on for one client. That also includes incentives and sanctions. So what's new with Dakota County, which I really, really enjoy, is that we can incentivize our clients. So for instance, if they complete programming, let's say treatment of some sort, mental health treatment, and they do it successfully, I can say, hey, guess what? I have an incentive for you. Congratulations, you did a great job. Here's a gift card to Walmart, or here's a gift card to, and they get to pick out of the selection that we have. So now we get to offer incentives to our clients, which I think is a really big hit. And it's very helpful for those who may be more in need as well. And then we also have sanctions, and finding the appropriate sanctions as an intervention, not just sending a client back to court and back to jail. That is usually the final, as if there's no other way, because we've tried so many times, that should be the last resort that we go to. And then there's also feedback and homework. There's a lot of times within those cognitive skills programs, there are some homework that we provide, and then feedback that we give to role play and different types of exercises that they may be practicing in those interventions. So that
you'll notice,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
You'll notice that a lot of our diagrams and our charts we use are circular, and they're not linear. That's a representation of how probation works. It can be messy at times. Mm-hmm. This is not a linear process where once you complete one thing, you go to the next and the next and the next, and there's never a situation where someone might backtrack. It's linear. It's very similar to the use diagram when it comes to relapse. The mm-hmm. person may make it to a certain point in their supervision and then backtrack. And then you may be starting conversations over again at a certain point. You may be having to take 2 or 3 steps back and kind of reset expectations, norms, all that stuff. It's not a linear process. It's not going to be always a clean, clear-cut process.
Exactly. And that's such a great point to make. And it actually makes me want to go back to this slide. So when a client does have a moment where they are hitting a wall, so to speak, we go back to this wall and say, hey, okay, let's look at this area. Guess what? It's not a shock that this happened because this was a high risk area for you. So how can we reduce, the risk in that area? And then we go back to gaining that professional alliance around that area, because a lot of times if a client makes a mistake, they're feeling shameful. So we got to work on that, offer them our role again and say, we're here to help you, and then go back in that process. So there might be areas where they're extremely successful, and then they might have a life crisis that causes them to relapse or causes them to commit another crime or whatnot. And so we're just looking at all of those factors in that cyclical model, like Brandon was just mentioning, and we're going back and forth to say which works here. Okay, let's pivot here. Let's do this. Let's use this tool in this arena or at this time to see what works best for our clients. So it's a constant working relationship with our clients. And then next, we also have the co-coaching model. This also was new at the same time that we developed our practice model. It's something that the high-risk agents are using at this time, and it's kind of just, we're working at it right now. We're still kind of piloting to see how this all goes, but we're also implementing it into our department as well. But these are just a list of questions, and we actually would start at the bottom of the list and go up, and that's how we work with our clients, and it actually incorporates this practice model into each of those questions. So it's kind of like hitting markers with clients and helping them overcome hurdles, or revisiting an area where they may struggle, or really finding out what is the greatest challenge here for you in this particular situation, and using this coaching model to help them to help implement an intervention for them, and to get them to kind of get over the hurdle that they may be facing. So the coaching model is very useful, it's very effective, but it's still a newer tool that we're using. We also have value cards and other tools that we use. We call this like our toolkit, because we pull them out of our back pocket and use with our clients. And oftentimes they're very effective with our clients. Even personally, if you ever practice them on your own, they're very fun. And so for instance, the value cards, this is just a simple example, but you see a list of values here. And what I would do with the client is sit down with them, and I'd have these values listed on laminated cards. And I'd have my client spread out 36 cards across my desk, and I would say, pick your top 10 to 12. They would narrow it down, and then I'd have them narrow it down again to about their top 5. And I would say, why are these values important to you? And then I would challenge them to say, is there any area of your life that does not line up with these values? And typically when I get to that question, they're going, yeah, this thing over here that I do doesn't line up. The fact that it doesn't line up with the fact that I say I value self-control, because I don't have it in this area of my life. And so then we rework and talk about how do we challenge those belief systems around that, and how do we re-engage in their thinking patterns and redirect their thinking patterns to correct the behavior. So that's just one example, but there's many other tools that we use, including thinking reports, hassle logs, like I mentioned earlier. There's all kinds of programs and tools that we can utilize with our clients, and we call these interventions. So this is something we would utilize in the middle of one of our monthly sessions with our clients.
So your future, this is the part where we're going to discuss what steps you can take to prepare yourself for future as a probation officer or somewhere in the field of community corrections. So you're going to be graduating, right? You're going to get that 4-year degree. For all probation officer positions in Dakota County, a 4-year degree is required. For an associate or assistant probation officer in the juvenile detention facility and the Juvenile Service Center in Hastings, there is an opportunity for an associate's degree. You can have an associate's degree for the assistant probation officer position, but in general, that 4-year degree in one of the social sciences. So I know this is broadened over the last few years. It was just a kind of a community corrections based career field, but it really has opened up to all the social sciences, whether it be sociology, psychology, social work. It really is opened up now to bring a lot of different philosophies, I would say, to the table with regard to how we work with the people we work with and the things that we do day to day. one of the most important things you can do at this point in your junior, senior year is to get that internship lined up. It's crucial for you to have that direct service experience, to really have a sense of what it means to sit down at the table with a client and have those conversations, to go through that process of submitting those reports to the court, to go in and have a seat in court and to get a sense of what the court process looks like. Those are invaluable lessons that you can't get any other way than to get in there and actually get your hands dirty. So I highly encourage all of you guys to seek out those internship opportunities, to connect with myself and Bree to have those conversations. If your school doesn't mandate an internship and you don't necessarily have the ability to do that, volunteer in the area where you think you want to, the area you think you have interest in. And I hesitate because you might not know, and that's fine. So just get in there, find an opportunity where you can get a sense of what that position does. But as Bree mentioned earlier, I also offer shadow opportunities. So once you get an internship or a volunteer opportunity, all you have to do is give me a call or shoot me an email saying I have opportunity to come in a few days next week, and I'll connect you in a different area with a different type of officer doing something completely new to you. And it gives you that opportunity to get a sense of the broad opportunities that a probation officer can provide you with. Job shadows, those are important as well. If you're not necessarily looking for that probation officer track, and all of our fields are very similar. We work with a lot of the different areas, say the Dakota County Jail, the Sheriff's Department. We are probation officers. They are corrections officers in the jail. So a CO is an opportunity as well. They have a great job shadow opportunity as well, if that's something that you feel like might be more of your calling. And then network. When you get into the field, network as much as you can. Take every opportunity you have to get out there and do new things. When an officer invites you to go to a treatment center, to go do a staffing of some sort, take advantage of that. Any type of opportunity you get to further your understanding of what's going on and to enrich your experience in your internship, take advantage of it. Meet those people, introduce yourselves. That's really important. That networking piece is key. Like Brianna was saying earlier, she came in as an intern and she did all of these things perfectly, obviously, because she got the job eventually. Social media, be aware of what you've got going on social media. That's an important piece with regard to what you want to do down the road, is having an understanding of how you present yourself as well. Evidence-based practices. I mentioned earlier that this is a great opportunity for you while you're still in school to really pick your professor's brains on this and get as much information as you can and get as well versed as you can in the field of evidence-based practices. Not just surface level, but if you can dig in and really have a stronger understanding of how those evidence-based practices work together, that's like next step. Not just knowing what they are, but how to integrate those models together and have those models work together for the outcome you're seeking. Inclusion, diversity, equity, get involved as much as you can in those opportunities at school as well. And understand that this field that you're coming into, it's a key part of what we do, is having a strong understanding of the people that we're working with, and we're trying to meet them where they're at. We're not trying to tell them who they have to be or how they have to be. We're trying our best to respect all of those different things that they bring to the table, and coming at that with an understanding that there's going to be different cultures that do things slightly different. At the end of the day, we are about public safety and community safety, but how we go about treating those individuals and maintaining that is what's crucial, and making sure that we are respectful of all those different things. And then people skills, building those people skills, making sure that you are able to have those conversations, that you're able to get along with individuals, that you're a team player, that you can bring something to the group that's beneficial to the group.
Yeah.
Brianna, do you have something else to add to that area?
I do. One thing I was thinking of, and it's something can do together, career fairs. I was like, oh, we
Yeah.
can put that on this page. Attend career fairs, even if you're not quite ready for a job, just go and ask questions about what their expectations are. Shake those hands. And that's a huge part of networking. And so as Brandon was mentioning, networking is huge. I kind of consider like how in real estate, it's location, location, location. In terms of community corrections, it's network, network, network. You gotta know people, you know, to help you get in the process and get your foot in the door. And so, but I would say attend career fairs often, especially the community corrections based career fairs, and just start asking questions or at least getting those contacts, because that's such a good way to find an internship, volunteer opportunity, or a new opportunity maybe that you weren't even considering.
Yeah, those first impressions are really important, and it's a great idea to get out there and meet us. Brianna goes with me oftentimes to these events, so you might see our faces. Once things get back to normal, you might see our faces out at the colleges again, and just come up and introduce yourselves. We would love to meet you and answer any of those questions and have those conversations to help you figure out and narrow down where you potentially might end up in the whole big picture of probation.
Mm-hmm. All right. And now it's time for questions. And so typically in person, we would say, who has but we actually got a lot of questions from the students. We're very thankful for that. So we're just actually, what we did was we took some time and we organized the questions, we consolidated them, and then we might have reworded some of them, but our goal is to answer them as thoroughly and honestly and as best as possible so that you guys can get well informed before you make a decision on what direction you want to go in your career. So we hope that our responses are super helpful. We did not practice our responses beforehand. So well, we did organize them, but we didn't practice the responses. So we're totally off the cuff right now. All right. So we organize them into three or four sections. I know there's career, student opportunities, job function. There's also, I'm missing miscellaneous, and then personal.
Personal. Yeah.
We're going to go through each one of those and answer as many questions as possible. And hopefully after this presentation, if you do have more questions, please let your professor know and send them to us, and we will answer those ones as well. All right, so getting started, I'll interview you, Brandon.
All right, sounds good.
What made you interested or want to become a probation officer?
I actually graduated in 2000 and immediately went into the juvenile section in a facility down in Georgia, where I'm from. And that's what brought me into the field, was wanting to work with youth who were struggling in some fashion. I didn't know exactly how, but to work with kids who had gotten on the wrong path and in some capacity help them figure out some of the questions they had going on in their lives. An interesting point of that I'm going to point out real quickly is that I stuck with that path for the majority of my career working with juveniles. And when I came to Dakota County in the adult domestic abuse unit, I took that position because I wanted to come to Dakota County. What I realized in doing that is that I still got the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of the kids, because I was, in some senses, helping address the root causes of the chaos within their lives. I was helping to get mom or dad or whoever that parental unit was sobriety, mental health resources. We were discussing employment. We were discussing housing. We were really touching on all of those aspects of what create chaos in the kids' life as well when they had kids. So you can really, regardless of which area you go into, you can make a difference in both areas, and really it just kind of depends on where your passion is.
Excellent. And then for me, it's interesting because I didn't want to become a probation officer. I intentionally avoided those courses when I went to school. I graduated from Hamline University, and I was a forensic science major, and so, or a certificate student, and also psych major and criminal justice as well. So I was in the arena, but I just was not interested. I was like, CSI all the way. That's what I'm going to do. It was interesting how this all came about. And so what happened is that I went to a career fair, and at the time, the former person who is now Brandon, who was formerly in that role, I met them in person at a career fair in St. Cloud. I went all by myself. I was very nervous and afraid. and they had a diversity training program or trainee program. And they talked about it. I was like, okay, might sound okay. We'll see about that. I'm not quite sure. I didn't really want to go as far as Dakota County in terms of travel because I lived in Minneapolis because I thought that was so far. And so, story short, I got involved, and that internship was a paid internship, and it lasted for about, I want to say 2 months. It was supposed to be 3 months long, but my journey is a little different. So when I came in, I was that paid intern for about 2 months, and then it shifted. And I had to shift into a temp position, which paid more. Still no benefits, but I got paid more. And that lasted for about a year. And that was because there were approximately 5 women that got pregnant. And so as a result of that, they continued to need me. And that whole year time spent qualified me to apply when another position opened up in the PSI unit. So my pathway is a little different. So that the way I look at it, hindsight, of course, is 2020. I feel like I was always supposed to do probation, but I was trying to run from it. And I don't know why, because I love it now, of course. I'm still here 11 years later, have not shifted jobs or anything. I just shifted positions within probation. One thing I wanted to mention too was that there's a difference between probation and parole and prison. And I meant to say this earlier, but I wanted to implement this now. And so the difference between, I'll start with jail and prison, and it all depends on the type of offense that's committed. So jail is for anyone serving a sentence that's 365 days and fewer. Okay. So if you're serving 90 days jail on a misdemeanor or on a gross misdemeanor up to 365, maybe you're serving 180 days. Those people will end up in jail. Prison is for anyone that has committed an offense, a felony. It has to be a felony. It's at least a year and 1 day plus, so 366 days or more. They would go to a Minnesota Department of Corrections facility and serve their time there. And then the next step would be probation or parole. So with probation, that is a community-based supervision, and that is for those who do not, I won't say do not, but those, instead of going to jail or prison, they're sent on probation as an opportunity to say, hey, if you are not successful with probation, we can revoke your probation and send you to jail or prison. So probation is like an opportunity for clients. Whereas parole is specifically designed, or the term essentially means someone coming out of prison back into the community. So those differences between the terms, I hope I clarified that for some of you, because I know that some assume that we're working with prisoners, and we're not. I do not work with prisoners. We do have some agents that are what are called supervised release agents, or SR, or even ISR, intensive supervised release. They specifically work with clients coming directly out of prison. And it's a little bit of a different caseload, but you work with the clients just the same.
And that's county by county. There are some counties where it's either probation or parole, and there's some counties where the agents are a mix of both probation and parole. Yes. And our county actually over the years has gone back and forth a couple of times on that with regard to how we structure our supervision also.
Yes, but I just wanted to clarify that for everybody, because I know that's a term, even in the news, when I watch the news, they'll say, so-and-so got arrested and went to prison. And I'm like, they're in jail. No, they're not in prison. They haven't even been sentenced yet. So that's why I don't watch the news. But anyways, so going on to the next question, we have on here, I think we kind of answered that, but was it easy to find a job after graduating from college? It was, I think, for both of us. I think it's safe to say, at least for me, I'll speak for myself. It was for me because it turned into that paid internship. However, I have to note that was the 2008 housing market crisis. So there was a hiring freeze. So I do feel blessed and very lucky that I got in. I will say that. Nothing was open at the time. I was even applying for federal jobs. I got, went through the application start of that process, and then they froze everything and made everybody reapply. And I was like, never mind, I got my position now. So it was challenging at the time, but not for me because I happened to get in.
I'd say that's a great question, but it's a hard one to answer to give you any sense of really how to judge it, because obviously at this point in time, there's a lot of unknowns. But I think the best answer is that there's things you can do to increase your chances of getting that job. There's definitely a path you can take to make you a more desirable candidate. All the things we've discussed already with regard to getting getting evidence-based practice as part of your repertoire, and really getting in and doing a well-balanced, wide-ranging internship or volunteer opportunity. Those are things that are going to just really make you a stronger candidate when you sit down at the table. I can tell you in 2008, when I was applying for a position, there were 800 candidates for one job opening in Dakota County. And I didn't get the job at that point. I was, but that was kind of where the market was in 2008. Like Brie was saying, it was a tough time to get a job.
It definitely was. Definitely. Going on to the next question. What type of education is required to become a probation officer? How many internships and volunteer opportunities did you take before becoming a probation officer, and did it help you get hired?
As we were saying earlier, the avenues for coming into probation have broadened. So it's any of the social science degrees is going to open the door for you to come into the probation field. And they're welcome into the probation field because it does give you a different perspective with regard to what you've studied coming into the field. How many internship and volunteer opportunities? I had a few internships, not necessarily in probation. I was in nonprofits at that point. As I was transitioning at a younger age, I did do some internships. Now they're crucial. Now they're just incredibly important to make you actually even a viable candidate. You got to have around 400 hours is roughly what it equates to of direct service experience. So whether that is working in a similar position in the field, or volunteering or interning in the field, those are going to provide you with those hours.
Exactly. A nice thing about the internship and volunteer opportunities as well, at least with internships sometimes, and it depends on the training, you sometimes can get or at least sit in on those like evidence-based practices trainings that we have to take as So it's really good to get, that's a great way for a resume and to get your foot in the door is to know what you're talking about in terms of EVPs and to say, I've been trained in this or I've been trained in that. And that kind of leads to my response to that is how many internships and volunteer opportunities that I take. My initial one, I believe, was at Shakopee Prison and as a case manager. And that's how I kind of got more interested in probation. I still wasn't thinking in that direction, but I was like, oh, like I can actually help people like do better and like share wisdom and knowledge and, you know, or just learn from them as well. And so that opened the door, but that is also where I got trained in the LSCMI. Previously used to be called the LSI, but I got trained as an intern. And so that was very beneficial at that time. I also completed a police internship with the St. Paul Crime Lab or St. Paul Police Department. And so I got to spend most of my time in the crime lab, and I did some other ride-alongs as well during that internship process as well. So I had two, and I liked both of them.
Great.
Yeah, and I do overall believe that they helped me get hired because I had the required amount of internships experience, and I had already had that experience of working with clients in a case management setting.
And specifically with Dakota County, as Brianna was mentioning, I think it was last year, there were 4 students who went through and were able to get level 1 and level 2 certified in motivational interviewing. And it was, I mean, that's something, and they're certified just like all of our agents were certified. The timing was right, the opportunity was there, and they were able to take advantage of that. And if you can put that on your resume, that is one of the examples of knocking it out of the park. I mean, that makes you, that puts you in a great place for presenting well at an interview.
And I forgot to mention too, the paid internship. So that was after graduation. I did complete that 2 months with Dakota County as well. But they treated it just like a regular internship. And there was another piece I was going to mention about the training part. And I totally forgot. It skipped my mind. So never mind. I'm like, what was I going to say? I just would highly recommend interning or volunteering. Like it's something I push big time with anyone that I'm talking to. Oh, what it was is that the reason I say that is because when you are in a county or in a organization that you have been trained, they're more likely to hire you because it's less training they have to do on the back end. And so if you're familiar with their terms, their systems, their acronyms, and their technology and how they work and their philosophy, it's such a great avenue for you to really get a great opportunity when you do get an interview.
I encourage all of our interns coming in to treat it like a 300, 400, 500-hour job interview. Every day you walk in the door, you're punctual, you're professional, yeah. You're appropriate in every manner. You're networking, you're doing all those things, and every interaction you have, you're taking into consideration that could be a hiring supervisor, it could be another PO, or it could be the director of the entire program. You just never know. Exactly. So treating every day like an ongoing job interview is crucial. And to be honest, we've had many students who have done that, taken that approach, done an outstanding job in their internship, and the number of students who have gotten hired after their internship has increased greatly over the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm. We like interns at Dakota.
Yes.
All right, moving on to the next page here. What can make a person more qualified to get an internship or job position within this field? What can be gained for people who have potential internships or volunteer work?
I would say that one person qualified to get an internship, really putting yourself out there. There really isn't a qualification to get an internship, but putting yourself out there to meet, to get out there and network, to have those conversations at the job fairs and whatnot, really increases the opportunity for you to present yourself as a really great candidate.
Mm-hmm. And for the second part of that question, I would say what can be gained, skill sets, people skills, technical skills. You would even gain the decision-making process to, is this the career that I actually want to be in? Because when you're hands-on in the job, you learn right away, is this for me or is this not for me? And so it's going to help you make that decision, hopefully before you graduate, as to, is this the right field that I'm in? What I've been studying, is this the direction I really want to go in? And an internship or volunteer opportunity will help you make that decision for sure.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. All right. Being a probation officer sounds demanding. Our pointed out that this job can be underpaid. What is it like? What is the pay like in Minnesota? And do you agree with our book?
I would agree that it's a demanding position. It definitely, there's aspects of this job that are very challenging, and it takes a certain type of individual to do it and to do it well. You're working with individuals who provide you with a wide array of challenges. You're really digging into the lives of the people that you're working with, and if you're not invested them to some degree, a professional manner, then you're not able to do a good job in the first place. So I would say it is demanding. Mm-hmm. Whether or not it's underpaid or not, I think that would be, that's debatable.
Yeah.
There's definitely different counties that pay better than other counties, which surprised me when I came into the field. Some of your smaller counties, some of your smaller counties way up north, don't pay nearly as well as some of the larger counties around the metro area. Mm-hmm. And even around the metro area, there's a pretty wide discrepancy between pay from officer to officer.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. I can proudly say in Dakota, I've never complained about my pay. We are one of the higher paid counties out of the 3 metro counties, Henry, Ramsey, and Dakota. And so I would just say one of the higher paid counties in the state pretty much. And so it depends, just piggybacking off of what Brandon said, it depends on where you go and what your position is and what you're doing. What I wanted to point out about the demanding piece is that it truly depends on what position of probation or level of probation that you're playing on or that you're in. So as I mentioned earlier, there's like the intake unit or the PSI unit, or you're a traditional supervision type agent, or you're on the probation service center. And so it really depends on which arena you kind of find your niche in, because you're going to have one probation officer that is really great with organizational skills, time management, and they're not sweating a bullet. And then you have others who might struggle or have other life challenges, and where it makes it seem like work is a lot. And so it really depends on the individual in terms of what is considered demanding. And so, and it depends on the position that you're in as well. So not every position is the same. Some have fewer clients, but a more stressful clientele or caseload because of like they're working with mental health. It takes a lot more energy to work with someone with mental health than it does if you're in like the intake unit and, you know, working mostly on paperwork. Not that they're good or bad, worse or better than the other. It's just a different level of functioning that from which you operate. Some people do not want to be at a desk on paper, and some people do not want to work that close with clients. So it depends on your preference and what is demanding.
Definitely.
All right, the next set of questions. What unexpected roadblocks appeared along the way? It's a good question.
That is a good question. I think that's one that's, it's a great question. It's kind of a broad question in the sense that it depends on what's going on at the time. I think this would be the situation we're dealing with right now with COVID-19 is a great example of what can potentially big picture affect how that process looks for you specifically, in the way in which you go about entering the field. So yeah, that's a great question, but it really depends on when you're coming into the field and what's going on. Because there are times where the state or the counties or the government as a whole will go through periods where they're not able to hire, and they're I think both Brianna and I have both gone through that process with Dakota County, and things just kind of they get frozen and new positions are not filled, and that makes it very challenging for students like yourself coming into the field. So that's definitely a potential roadblock that someone could run into.
Yeah, definitely. Even in terms of just a specific job function, unexpected is like a client passing away. You don't know how much that can weigh on you as a probation officer when you're going through something like that and you get a police report that says victim deceased and you're like, oh my gosh, like what happened? And so you have to learn how to manage that and do your own self-care as well. And so that can be an unexpected roadblock in terms of how to manage that along the way. But COVID-19, I totally agree with that. That has completely shifted probation. So it's interesting that we're doing this video now in the midst of COVID, but it is what it is. And
right.
I'm sure there's other things along the way, like if you get married and have a baby, you know, that might change the way your work schedule. You might go part-time. There's all kinds of things that may be unexpected. They may not necessarily be roadblocks, but they just might be unexpected events or life instances that come up, and you just have to learn how to pivot.
Right.
Yeah. If you could choose another area of the criminal justice system to have gone into, what would it be? Ooh. For me, originally, I wanted to be an FBI agent. And back in my mind, I still would do it. Or go back, you know, go into the forensics. I have never let that go. But it's just something that it wasn't for this particular season of my life. When I started probation, I knew that's where I needed to be. So I think it's going to come back around at some point in the future. And I think that probation actually has prepared me for a career like that in the future. So we'll see. But that's something I probably would have done if I had to choose another career as FBI agent.
I would say when I entered the field, I actually tried out a lot of different entry points because I said there's a lot of different ways to go about working with this population. So I worked in community-based programming. I worked in a school-based program. I worked in the juvenile units or juvenile section, the adult section, and I was a prison guard for a while. So I've gone through a lot of the different avenues that you can work with individuals that we work with. And I would say that this working with community-based probation is definitely my favorite.
Excellent. And then what are some ways you use to speak up about issues within your work environment, whether it be other workers or parolee? For me, I got very involved in our committee groups. So like I'm involved in our diversity, our IDE, inclusion, diversity, and equity committees on different levels. I'm also involved in our employee resource groups called ERGs in Dakota County. And so I got involved internally into our culture at the workplace, and that has helped me voice any concerns that I had or listen to the concerns of others or challenge opinions or, you know, try to come up with solutions on how to make our work environment better. And we've done a lot of work over the last few years in that area of IDE, and we have made a lot of improvements in Dakota County, and I can feel it and it feels really good. at this time. So I'm proud to say that we have a work environment that's willing to move forward and make changes.
I would agree with that. I've gotten involved in various groups and organizations within work to help give me that voice as well. As in with any company, any job, you can be as invested or uninvested or engaged or unengaged as you choose to be, I guess. But the more you engaged and the more engaged you get, the more invested you are in the health of the organization as a whole, and the more, the better you do with it overall. So getting invested in some fashion is important, and it does give you that voice to be able to address things in a way that maybe you couldn't if you were not invested.
Yes. And in terms of when it comes to working with a client, I often have meetings with my supervisor. If we ever have an issue with a client, we call it a staffing. So we would staff our case among our units or just one-on-one with our supervisor and address any issues and get the best solution to respond to the situation.
Yeah, we're not expected to have every answer at any given time. I mean, a big part of that is collaboration. And we collaborate constantly with our coworkers, with our supervisors, with community-based organizations as well, because we're not providing every aspect of what that individual has to participate in. We contract out with a lot of services, for mental health, for chemical health, for lots of the things that are required of the individuals we work with. We're working with the community to get those needs met.
No, that's so true. We do a lot of collaborating. Right now, a client that I'm working with he's on our RAP team, which is our reentry assistance program, which consists of couple of probation officers from our department, but they specialize in this program. Also social work is his case manager. And now I have him in a treatment center. And so I'm kind of a person that's connecting, the connection point to everybody, because he has to report to me, but we all have to work together in order to help him be successful. So collaboration is a necessity. It's a necessity for sure.
Do men and women experience different tasks or duties within the corrections system?
Great question. I remember we did review this one and we were kind of like, how do we answer that?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we pointed out, and you probably could allude more to this than I can, but we were talking about one of the issues that we see is our jail system. And so in Dakota County, we cannot house women in our jail. So we actually have a contract with Ramsey County. And so when a female gets arrested in Dakota County, she's transported over to Ramsey County for housing. And so we don't have an answer necessarily as to why that is. I think it's mostly funding or how they structure things or whatnot, but that is something that there's a difference there. That's a very clear, significant difference. I would also say for women coming into the corrections system, they probably, I would say, typically get lighter sentences than men. I don't know if you would agree with that, Brandon, but I would say across the board, they probably get more, I'm just trying to think, like more therapeutic services or like recommendations in that sense. And they're usually coming in for what I would call not softer crimes necessarily, but more like theft or DWI. I would say they don't come in as much for violent crimes, if that makes sense.
So we initially went at that from the client perspective, but from the possibility looking at it from our perspective as officers, the differences in men and women. So for one thing, we have the gender specific caseloads. Those are female officers working with female clients. And again, that's just really trying to meet the individual needs of the clients that we work with. So that's going to be one difference, is that working with the clients in a different way. And then there's things like UAs, and how we transport people, just making sure that we're doing that in a safe manner, and following the expectations that are set by the county with regard to how we do those.
Yes, and for those of you that don't know what a UA is, that is a drug test, a urine analysis. So we use a lot of acronyms, but UA, drug test, that kind of thing. That's gender specific on each end. So, but that's a good point that he made too about the gender specific caseload. We use the term gender specific, but we're only referring to a all female caseload. as a probation officer, for me, I have an all male caseload. My knack is I work better with men. I don't know why, but that's my niche right now, and that's what I'm working. But I have had a mixed caseload prior to that. So I've done different things, but as we continue to use evidence-based practices to find out what works best for our clients, we will shift and mold and do what we need to do to make sure we're best servicing our clients. So if it looks like a gender-specific caseload or a female that has an all-male caseload, we'll do that, but we don't have any female caseloads that are supervised by a man. So
and to back up what Brianna said earlier with regard to the numbers and the types of offenses, when I was a adult domestic abuse officer, I had roughly 70 to 80 clients at any given time, and probably had a max of 3 females on my caseload at max. Yeah. So it was really heavily weighted towards the male side when it comes to those types of offenses.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. All right, moving on. Now we're moving forward to job function related questions. So what is the average work day like? What do you have to do on a day-to-day basis? And is there lots of paperwork? Good question. So we'll, Brandon and I was going to call you, I don't know who Jason is. And I was going to say we have 2 completely different jobs. And so our average work day is completely different. So for me, typically, well, right now in the midst of COVID, I'm working from home, as you can see. But if I was in the office, I would be coming in. My hours are 8 to 4:30. We can flex it a little bit if we need to. But I would come in at 8 o'clock or whatever time I get in the morning. And then I probably would be looking at my calendar and figuring out how many appointments I have that day, or trainings or committee meetings or whatnot. And then in terms of working specifically with clients, because that's probably what you want to know, is that I would be sitting down with a client, and I always book about an hour for each client. The session takes about 45 minutes. I'm utilizing the coaching session. I'm utilizing those tools that I mentioned earlier, like the value cards or the thinking reports. I might be making phone calls for them because some of them are without cell phones or they're homeless. I'm doing what I need to do in that hour time with my client to get them the resources that they need. I might be making a referral to our employment resource career person or organization that we contract with called RTI, and they help clients find jobs. And so, I mean, I'm usually trying to be a connection point for my clients in that time frame. So that's when they do show up. We'll have appointments that are missed by clients. I'm also doing field visits. So I might visit a treatment center, like I've been to Teen Challenge a lot. I go to different treatment centers as well to build that collaboration and that rapport with that facility or that organization as well, because it's good to know if I know they do a good work, I will send other clients there as well. So there's a lot of collaboration throughout the day. We take a break, so I get about an hour lunch break. I typically will leave my office and go somewhere else because I love being outside or doing something else. And then by the end of the day, I'm closing up for the day. And I will say, the question is there a lot of paperwork? It depends on the client. Each client is so different. So yes, there's a lot of paperwork in their file, which is electronic, but am I filling out a lot of paperwork? No. I have my own notes that I created where I use a clipboard to write down notes for a client, and I'm typing in their notes called a chrono to capture our conversation for the day. We also look at their targeted behaviors. We're looking at their change talk. We're looking at all these different functions, and we put it in a thing called a smart chrono, which helps us go back and look at for the next meeting where we left off, or anybody else. Like if I'm out and sick and I say, hey, can you meet with my client? Brandon, he can say, okay, this is where Brianna left off, so tell me, let's pick it up from there. So we have a really good internal system that we use, but in terms of paperwork, I'm not filling out a lot of paper. There's a lot of paper in my office, but that's a whole different paper, so yeah.
And that's going to look different from position to position. Brianna, as a field supervision agent, is going to have a very different day than, say, a pre-sentence investigation writer.
Yes.
Drastically different. Those individuals are going to be meeting with their clients, going through that investigative process, spending an afternoon or a day or so writing up that report and getting it submitted. And then they start that process over, and they're connecting with a new client, or they've already got that other client lined up, and they start the whole process over again. Right. So each position can look, the day-to-day operations can look very different.
Yeah, there's some units that are more on a rotation, like intake. I've been on that one before, and that is a lot of paperwork to do, but you're also meeting with clients, you're doing a risk assessment, but you're also doing a lot of background checks. And so again, the physical paperwork, no, not necessarily, but you might get a stack of somebody's criminal history that's this thick, and you have to sift through it and go through and, you know, organize the criminal history report. So it is different, like Brandon was saying, based on the position, and it depends on your preference. When I started as a PSI writer, it was a great skill because I like to write. And so now being in my doctorate program and having done my master's, paid to write papers. That's essentially what that position is. So for those of you that are like, I enjoy writing papers, PSIs might be your thing, but it's an investigative approach. So it's a different way to do it.
And it's different county by county as well. So I was an officer in Sherburne County before, and it's a smaller county, like we discussed earlier, and you serve every role in that county as an officer. From the second that person was arrested until they were discharged, you did every single step of the process. In Dakota County, we're so large, we're very compartmentalized. So there are going to be different POs handling the different steps of the process. And then the person gets passed along to the next level, and it's very clean and very effective, in my opinion. But you're not going A through Z like you would in some other county structures where you're doing everything.
Yes, good point. And then what is it like working with a person who's on probation in terms of biases and professional? We assume that's where you were going with that question. And then what are some of the extreme cases you've had to deal with? In terms of working with a client on probation, it's shifted over time. So in terms of, if I give a basic description, it's like being a case manager, because that's what we're doing. So you meet with the client and you are in charge of helping them successfully complete the conditions of probation. So my job is to really get to know the client, to understand their belief system and their values, so that I can engage with them in that arena and their thinking patterns and everything else that we might need to know in terms of their background. And so once I get to know a client, I ask them even, what is their pattern? Are you a runner? Are you a person that ducks and dodges probation? Or are you someone who wants to really get this done and out of the way and get off as fast as you can? And so if they're honest with me, you know, they'll tell me kind of where they're at, and I work with them wherever they're at. I don't judge them based on what they tell me. And so a big part of working with someone on probation is clarifying your role. So for instance, as a part of that practice model that I mentioned earlier, role clarification is one of those steps. So for me, I tell clients, my role as a probation officer, I have two roles. One is to motivate you to succeed, and what success may mean for you legally, right? So I say it could be getting a cell phone, to buying a house, to getting off probation, to going back to college, getting your GED, finding a job, getting out of a negative relationship, getting mental health services. It could be anything. And as long as it's something, you know, in that legal arena, I will help them try to get there as best as I can. And then my other part is to help them successfully complete the conditions of probation, which I call accountability. So I'm motivator and accountability partner. So with the accountability piece, I say that's what I get paid to do. I got to make sure you get those conditions done. But as the motivator, I'm going to help you get them done in a way that works for your life. So I am often marrying personal goals that they have nothing to do with probation along with their probation goals, because they typically go hand in hand and they fit together. So working with the client is really truly like a deep level of case management. And it's also working with their current criminogenic behaviors, antisocial patterns, and all these other things that are forces, I would say, against them being successful. I have to use my skill, professionalism, and strategy and how to turn that around and make them go in the right direction.
Great explanation.
Thank you. In terms of biases, over time, I would say when I started, I was authoritative and very judgmental. That's because I was judgmental towards myself. But over time, I have reduced those biases, and really, I think I've become a better officer, agent, change agent, whatever you want to call it, transform agent, over time, because I just see them as people who made a different decision that I did on the same day. And that's what I tell them. I say, I'm not here to judge. I don't even ask them oftentimes about their offense, because I'm like, I don't want to go back there. Let's move forward. I'm a motivator. So oftentimes I am engaging with them in a way to make them feel as non-judged as possible, so that they can open up, so that we can build that rapport and work together. And then in terms of extreme cases, I don't know if you wanted to jump in, Brandon.
Well, I would say, again, that's one of those deals where it depends on the caseload you have. And not to say that every caseload can't have extreme cases or extreme individuals, but some of my more extreme situations involved working with people who were either significantly struggling with mental health or chemical health issues. I mean, these are people, the people we were working with are people that are out and about. You know, they might be coworkers, they might be neighbors. They're relatively normal people for the most part. Everybody knows someone who's on probation probably. So it's not like it's a different group of people we're working with. There are situations where people find themselves in tough spots. We all do that. In certain cases, the people we work with, their tough spots are tougher than others at times. And I definitely have had situations working with someone who has come into the office who was clearly extremely high on, you know, some of the bigger drugs, high on meth or some of the different opiates and whatnot, where you're trying to have a rational conversation with someone who's not able to think in a rational manner. That's a challenging, extreme situation that you can find yourself in.
Yeah, I can think of a client where if I were to say the client's name, other POs will be like, I've had him. And so typically those clients, because they've hit the revolving door of community corrections, I would consider those more extreme cases. And that, like Brandon said, it's usually a combination of mental health and chemical use and trauma. I would say that too. And so when now that's combined and they're not either getting the services or they're resisting the services, it becomes extremely hard to work with them, or they might do more bizarre behaviors, I would say. Like, so the person I'm thinking of had me in court testifying and he thought he was like Matlock or somebody trying to interview me in front of everybody, trying to like ridicule me. And it was just like, it was pretty extreme, but he didn't win in the end. So, but I felt bad because he's not getting the help he can get. And we were doing everything in our power to keep him, and it wasn't working. So I would say that was one of the extreme cases that I've had to deal with.
What's it like being responsible for all of those people?
It's great. No.
It has its days. It really, depends on what's going on. There's times where you feel like your caseload's falling apart. It feels like everybody is trying to get arrested in the same week. And there's times where people seem to be doing well, and you knock on wood and you hope that it keeps going that direction. So it ebbs and flows. And your feelings with regard to what you're doing ebbs and flows. There are going to be times where you feel really great about it, and there's going to be times where you feel like you're not making the changes or helping them make the changes in their lives that you would hope to have done.
Right. Yeah. And I would say with probation, and we kind of joke about this, but we say our work is never done. So you don't go home at the end of the day like, I finished something, I accomplished this. There's another one coming, whatever this is, there's another one coming around the corner. So the work is never done. And once you can shift your mindset or paradigm to say that this is a continual work that we're doing, then it's like you just get used to the fact of like you have different things that go on and you're able to be nimble enough to manage those different arenas that are at your desk, or those different tasks that you have to do. So it does take a lot of time management skills. Nothing is perfect. No PO is perfect. No case is perfect. So we don't even impose it on anyone coming into the county. We just say, take your time. And if you have questions, we are all here to help you. So it's interesting. So yeah, there's so many different kinds of people on your caseload that it's interesting to be able to work with so many different kinds of people and to be able to have that skill. All right, moving on to some additional job function questions. What happens specifically when someone violates their probation, and how often does that happen? Let's see. Specifically, when someone violates their probation, it depends. So textbook answer is we would file a violation report. They will go back to court. The judge would determine a consequence for their behavior, and then they get placed back on probation, typically. That's also kind of the former way of doing things. We used to do that a lot. So we realized that a lot of people were going to jail or their sentences being executed, sent back to prison based on these technical violations of probation. And so when we shifted our culture, we also shifted the way we dealt with violations. So we started utilizing a grid and kind of looking at intermediate sanctions. So we'll say, typically, or what we do now is say, if you're going to go to court, the goal probably is because we've done what we can from the intermediate sanction level, meaning like a medium level or consequence before we need to go to court. And so when we do that, so now we might say, we need you to do community work service within the next 3 months and complete this many hours. Otherwise, we're going to go back to court because I've tried this with you. I've tried this. We've tried this. You haven't met the deadlines or whatever the case may be. So we also try to be compassionate towards them because sometimes clients just don't get it. There's some that just struggle cognitively and they're not going to get done what you're asking of them. So you have to work with them in a little bit of a different manner. Again, that goes back to that, the diagram between the two philosophies. Either you can nail them, tail them, jail them, or you can actually like work with them where they're at. And so that's the goal. So we're trying to reduce the number of violations that we actually elicit. So that's the ultimate goal. And I am one that, I don't know if they enjoy this, but I extend my grace for the client because I really want to try everything and give them every opportunity to get it back together before we have to go to court. So. And how often does that happen? Depends on the client.
Yeah, and that changes with even that specific client. There'll be times of the year when they're facing greater stress in their lives, and maybe they're more likely to relapse in some fashion. So it really is, there's so many factors that play into that. It's hard to nail it down, but there are a lot of different factors that go into that.
Right. Like you might respond differently to someone who relapsed that had been sober for 6 months versus someone who committed a new assault and has a charge. So because the violation is so different for each person, you have to respond differently based on them and their current life situation that they're experiencing. If someone's like, man, my best friend just died and I used and I'm so sorry, we could work with that. We're going to overlook that and keep moving forward. We're not going to send you back to court because you relapsed. If that makes sense. So we're going to work as much as we can with the client.
And that leads directly into that next question. Have you ever felt empathy or sympathy towards some offenders or no?
Yeah,
so
you have
to. You have to have that empathy to work with the people we work with. It doesn't, you're not creating excuses for their decisions or their behaviors, but you're coming at it from an empathetic perspective with regard to what that individual is dealing with and where they've come from and how they're going to continue to move forward in a way that's beneficial for everyone.
I completely agree with that. You must have an empathetic knack to you in order to do this job. Otherwise, you will stress yourself out. You can't even blame you have to learn how to be compassionate towards others, and especially when you're working with people who have made bad decisions and are already feeling guilty, shame, rejection in some aspect. You have to have empathy towards someone who, like, maybe unlike you, like they don't get it in terms of whatever get it means. Like, struggling with certain things, you have to show them that empathy, like they're not there yet, and that's okay. You know, we're going to be in this spot together until we get through this part here, and go through it together to help them be successful. So,
is it hard knowing that some of these people in probation could be innocent, or that the situation could be a whole misunderstanding?
It is. When I used to do bail evaluations, I remember talking to a victim in a case of a domestic. And at that time she had reported, I just called because he didn't come home on time. So there was no fight. There was nothing, but she reported that there was when he got arrested. And she told me that, but it didn't change anything because the state had already charged him. And so I think he still eventually was, I don't know if he pled guilty or not, I can't recall, but I was very upset about that because I was like, okay, that's not how the system works. You know, that's not what you call police for, to make up a story. And that's just one case. That's not always, but it is hard knowing when someone doesn't deserve to be in our system and they got put there because of someone else's negligence or jealousy or anger towards that person. Or maybe it was seen differently by the police and one person got picked up and the other didn't. But when I come in and I hear them saying, this is unfair, I shouldn't be here, or there was no gun, but they still charged me with that, and like, what are we going to do? And I just say, you know what? How you perceive probation is how you go. And you can look at it as a very unfair advantage, a very unfair process and whatnot. I mean, we're working in the system. It's, you know, it has its issues, but, or you can look at this and say, this is a blessing in disguise and I can learn something from this process. I can take something away from this experience on probation. So I try to help them change their perspective on it when they're in that type of situation.
Great.
All right. What is the routine or guidelines for people on probation for more serious or violent crimes?
Working with individuals who've committed certain offenses, they're gonna come into the system with different expectations at times. So, for example, your criminal sexual conduct cases or your domestic abuse cases, those clients coming in to the probation system are going to have expectations of having really specialized treatment, and it's typically going to be longer and more intensive treatment than some of your other more generic or less serious crimes. So someone coming in for a domestic abuse charge, they're looking at several months of weekly domestic abuse programming. Someone coming in with a criminal sexual conduct charge, they're looking at months or years of therapy, either inpatient or outpatient. So it really depends on what the case is, but typically speaking, or broadly speaking, generally speaking, the more significant the crime, the more intensive the treatment and the services are. And that's an example of an evidence-based practice. More high risk individuals get higher levels of service, and lower risk individuals get lower levels of service.
Exactly. So. And so those clients would also have more conditions to complete. But as a probation officer, our responsibility would be to make sure we are not giving them too much to set them up to fail. That's never the goal. And so we would work on one thing at a time, because they typically are on probation for a number of years, especially for someone with a serious or violent crime. So we have time to work on this stuff. And so we would go through each condition one by one, or at the speed that the client is comfortable with. If they want to tackle two things at one time, like cognitive skills programming and therapy, they can do that. You know, so we'll work with our clients on that, but they typically have more conditions and longer treatment expectations.
What do you do if someone on probation is not clearly breaking the rules, leading to them being arrested, but are not at all caring about the probation rules?
Great question.
Yeah.
Those clients, I would say, sometimes they're a little more difficult to work with. They're fun to work with because they're like, I'm just here to get done what I want to get done. I'm not trying to get all deep with you and solve any life problems. I just want to get this done and move on. And so you have those clients that will get their stuff done, and then some that are kind of play the line. And it gets a little difficult, but it really depends on how they respond to consequences too. They don't have to care about the probation rules and conditions. It's not about caring, but they can still get them done. And so sometimes I'm often redefining what that means to them. Like if they're saying, I don't want to do this or whatnot, I might spin it in a way to say, how could this benefit your family? How could this benefit your job? Or could you get promoted as a result of this? Or down the line, if you did this, thinking future forward, this is what could be positive as a result of you completing this. So most clients do play the fine line. That's very, very common. But we're not trying to, again, nail them, tail them, jail them, or get anybody in trouble. But we definitely want to seek out their internal motivation and help them see things in a different way to actually get them towards wanting to get things completed.
Right. Could you get an example of when you've seen the best in a person who is a prisoner, and an example of when you've seen the worst in someone?
Ooh.
Yeah. I would say that you do get invested in the people you work with. So seeing the worst in that individual might be a situation where they've committed a new crime or, crime of violence in some situations, if you're working with like the domestic unit, where they've gone out and they've reoffended against the victim or created a new victim, brought a new victim into the whole situation. And those are situations where it can be challenging. And for self-preservation, you have to be able to navigate that from a personal standpoint in a healthy manner also. We are invested in the people we work with, but at a certain point, you got to have the ability to kind of cut that off, so you're not taking that home and it's basically ruling your life, and that can really, you can get overloaded in that manner as well.
Very true. For me, I would say seeing the best in a person. Anytime they make a change, a positive change, and they take it internally, like they transform internally, that's always the best that I see in someone, because they make a mind or a paradigm shift, and then they're in a completely different direction, and they look at their past and they're like, I don't even want to go back there. Like, I'm not using again, or I'm not going to be violent again, or whatever they're saying. To me, that's the best in someone. But also, I would say there was a client who came into my caseload, and there was a time when I had a specialized caseload based on a city. And I would have to say, I can't give you a percentage, but I would say majority of the clients were probably a part of some supremacist organization. And I had 2 clients during that time renounce their membership to such supremacist organizations. And so that was a very interesting dynamic to have, being a Black female probation officer working with typically Caucasian males on that caseload. And so I would say that was one of my highlights. I did not encourage it at all, but they felt that they needed to tell me that. And they made some really big shifts in their life. And I thought it was pretty powerful to see. So one person, they decided they wanted to start a nonprofit to cover up any kind of like discriminatory tattoos. You know, and I was like, okay, if I wasn't a PO, like I would totally fund that, like support that in some manner. So it was just something that was along with my beliefs in that sense, but that was the best that I saw in someone. And then the worst, I would say wasn't my client, but we did witness a client overdose in the office one day. And that was pretty tough for everybody involved. And so the client lived, thankfully, but it can be tough. And so that had never happened before. But it is something that could happen. And so seeing the worst in someone being like they're at their worst in that moment, like near death, is not a fun sight to see. So the reality, it's not a common thing again in something in probation, but it is something that could potentially happen. And so you, again, like Brandon said, you have to learn how to do self-care, your own time management, know when to go home in the middle of the day or at the end of the day to kind of de-stress and take the day off of your shoulders. So those are my responses. What is the most drastic change you've seen an offender go through to change their life? I think I kind of answered that question already just in the last one. Anything else you wanted to add to that, Brandon?
You know, I mean, I've seen people who have really shifted that internal motivation from it being someone else telling them they've got to do it, or you have to do it, or me telling them at some point you need to do X, Y, and Z, to them being able to sit down and really explain why they want to do it, what they're doing and why they want to do it. And it's, you know, it's hard to really express it, because it's something that when you're sitting there and you're invested in working with that individual and you're having that conversation, it really is a special feeling to see that person make that drastic of a change, knowing where they came from to where they're at and where they're choosing to go is pretty outstanding.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How have your jobs been?
Go ahead. No, I was reading it too.
Okay. How have your jobs been affected by COVID-19 pandemic? We are both sitting in our homes right now creating this video. So we are working from home. We're not in your classroom right now, which is where we would love to be. Yes. So we're working from home. POs are in general doing everything they can to meet with their clients remotely. There are certain positions where that's not possible. We run the Juvenile Service Center, which is the locked detention facility for kids. And obviously we have to keep that staffed. So those juvenile POs in the service center are there day and night, 24/7, working with those kids to keep things safe. And that's been in the news a lot lately with regard to individuals who are incarcerated at this point in time. So we've made a lot of changes with regard to the process within the facility to keep them safe. So there's a lot of changes for sure.
A lot, definitely. I would say I think the number is 80% of our counties are working right now.
Mhm.
There's public are not allowed to go into the buildings. The courts are pretty much shut down, and we're actually operating through telework for court as well. For those of us that still have court hearings, most of them have been canceled. So how has my job been impacted? I actually was able to catch up. Thanks, COVID. Because of that, I was able to actually sit down and go through my list, find out which clients need to be discharged, which ones need to be contacted and still violated in that whole process. So it's impacted everybody in a way that of course we didn't expect, but I think overall what I've been hearing is that a lot of people are actually enjoying working from home. And so I know that the county right now is looking at what is actually working right now in terms of when we get back to our new normal, is teleworking going to be a bigger part of what we do? And I think it will be, but it's just one of those things that's still up in the air right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How do you manage to maintain balance in your life when dealing with some of the more challenging individuals in our society? Great question.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those things where if you can't help someone else if you haven't first helped yourself, kind of a thing. You gotta, if you don't take the time to take care of yourself in whatever way that looks like, hopefully healthy ways. But if you're not taking care of yourself and trying to maintain that balance in your life, then you're not going to be able to pass that along to the people you work with.
Mm-hmm.
So it's crucial in our line of work. For me, it's being outdoors, it's doing stuff with my family, staying active, being out in nature for me, doing whatever I can to get out and be outside, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, I would say I do a lot. And I had to laugh when I saw managing to maintain balance. I thought of Brandon because he's told me plenty of times he needs to be my life coach to help me as a joke because I'm extremely busy. And so the way I do life. And so one of the ways I do self-care is through dancing as a choreographer. So I take ballet lessons. I'm trying to think what I spend a lot of time with family, friends, or, just doing things that aren't as work focused. I think I'm one of those people that is able to compartmentalize my job and all these other functions. And I think that's how I'm able to do everything that I do. But I'm also an entrepreneur outside of Dakota County. So I have other things going on. So that work usually is not weighing heavy on me during the day. But another one of those pieces as well is I don't like watching the news. And I stopped doing that a number of years ago. And that is a form of self-care for me. And people say, why don't you watch the news to stay, afloat with everything? I'm like, I pay attention. I get the newspaper and I have my news app, but working my job every day is working the news. There were, when I first started, that my cases were ending up on the news, on the 5 o'clock news. So I would go to work and then I'd come home and then turn on the news and they'd be like, so-and-so was arrested and held in bail on $50,000. I'm like, I did that bail, and I'd be like, oh my goodness, like that's so weird to see that on TV. They don't say my name or anything, but I knew my job was more real than what I was thinking of it as. And so I had to learn to pull back from the news because I'm like, I work the news. That's what I do every day. And so in order to do that, I detach from that when I get home, and work is work, home is home, school is school, like everything is in its position or compartment in my mind and in my life.
Yeah. And it's crucial to being able to last in this field.
Mm-hmm. You have to, otherwise you will not make it. You will get burned out.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're truly making a difference in the parolee's life?
Yes, very much so. That's always my attempt. Do I make the difference? I don't think I always will know that answer, but there are some clients that will give kudos to you as a probation officer and say, like I'll be honest, I've had clients who cry when it's time to be done with probation. Because they're like, you were awesome. You did this. You helped me with this and X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, thank you. And they're just like, I don't really want to get off probation because it doesn't feel like probation. And I'm like, that's my goal. Thank you. Like, that was the whole point, is to help you get through this successfully and think about it differently. And so I would say, yes, we make a difference in people's lives, but it doesn't happen for every client. I will honestly say that.
No. And there's times where you're not going to see it also. There's going to be situations where clients that's not their mode of communication. They're not warm and fuzzy in that way. And they may walk away, and the sense of making a difference is maybe you never see them again. And that's a success. If they never re-enter the system, then you've done your job.
Exactly. So oftentimes we'll say, I never want to see you again, but I mean that in a good way. And they say, I don't want to see you either. We're like, bye. right?
Yeah.
We both know what that means. And that just means like stay out of the system, stay focused, keep moving forward. And there are some clients who will self-sabotage at the end of probation just to stay on. And we don't do that, but it happens because they're not ready for change yet. They made the changes, but they're not ready to do it without the training wheels, so to speak, of probation. And so we always try to build that support for them before they get discharged from probation so that they don't fall off and end up back in the cycle again.
Yep.
All right, moving on to personal. So we're almost done here. Would you say that working in corrections has changed you personally? Any changes in personal values or how you view other people from before you started in your line of work? Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. Yes, I would say for me personally, it did kind of open my eyes to what goes on in our society and communities. You have a greater understanding of the kind of the good and the bad. I think that's good for. I've always thought that that's good for everybody to have a stronger understanding of, to a certain degree. You know, if you're getting too invested in that, it can be challenging. Not everybody needs to know the darker side of what we deal with. It's just not always healthy. We chose this profession, and that's something that we deal with day to day. But it can change how you view people it can choose how you view people if you're dealing with the same type of a caseload or just dealing with people in general that really struggle to make positive social decisions on a consistent basis.
Yes, very true. I would say, I think I alluded to this a little bit ago, but yes, it does change you personally. I reduce my judgmental biases towards people in a sense of like, and I think that shift happened when we made that philosophical shift from working with offenders to clients. And I started seeing people as people versus this label. And so I, again, would say, you're no different from me. We're sitting on different sides of the table because on the same day, we just happen to make a different decision. I could easily be over there and you could easily be over here in this chair. And so prior to that, that was not my mindset. That's not how I talked. That's not, that wasn't my background or even where I came from. And so I definitely made some of those deep internal personal changes because I had to take a look at myself, my family, my environment, my culture, and see the differences in how I was talking and how I was doing things to make it more in alignment with my personal value, mission, and goals, and also with the county. And so I value people more, I would say, and I'm more graceful with people. I give people more opportunities to change or to do what they need to do. I'm often helping those around me not be so judgmental as well, because they don't hear themselves a lot because they haven't done the work that we've done as probation officers. So it does carry out into my my lifestyle as well.
Okay. What is the most rewarding part of working with others in probation and corrections? And what is the most important thing you have learned as a probation officer? What is the most challenging or stressful part of your job? It's a good question. A lot there.
I know. I'm like, that's a loaded question.
Rewarding part of working with others in probation and corrections. Again, there's two sides of that. Working with others as far as our peers, and then working with people who are on probation. There's a lot of collaboration that takes place, and it feels really good when you're able to sit down at the table and rather than saying, I'm going to address this one aspect of the person's life or issues that they're dealing with, you sit down and as a group, you come up with a collaborative plan with regard to addressing 2 or 3 or 4 different aspects of what they're struggling with. So when it comes to working with other people, that's a really rewarding aspect of what we get to do.
Yeah, for me, I would say seeing the change in other people when you're working with them and knowing that the skills that you possess are impactful in that person's life. And to me, the reward is when they win. So it's not necessarily about me doing my job and being good at what I do. It's when they win. And part of that process of winning was that the skill set was involved. And so when they win, it makes me feel good because I say, that's why I do what I do. And whenever I say that, it's always a reminder why I'm a probation officer. And then the most important thing you've learned as a PO, I have learned so much. I don't answer that question. I mean, I am so thankful for being a probation officer because in the other arenas of which I do in terms of entrepreneurship, education, whatever, there's so much that I've learned from Dakota County or from being a probation officer, the trainings that we've had in evidence-based practices, to the diversity training, to the involvement and the shifts and the philosophical changes we've made, to interpersonal skills and growing in those and doing my own introspective growth. Like, I attribute a lot of that to my work in Dakota County. And so I don't know if there's a most important thing, but I would say being transformed internally as to who I am and redefining my values and things like that. I would say that if I had to give an answer, it would be that. But I have learned so much in those that it transfers out into these other parts of what I do. I think is extremely beneficial.
I'd say that looking at the people we work with in a different light, it's easy to sit down and read a police report and wonder how in the world anyone could have done what they've done. And that, you know, we deal with some very challenging situations. But when you sit down and you talk to the people and you get to know them and you get a sense of where they're coming from, you know, a lot of times people, they'll surprise you. There's a lot of great things you can learn just by sitting down and having that conversation and not having that judgment.
Right. I fully agree with that. And then
what is the
challenging or stressful part of your job? For me, I would say anything that's a little more technical versus adaptive. And we use these terms in probation right now, where technical change is something that you can like physically change or do. It's kind of like if you had to change the way you do something on a system in a computer, or how you do probation violations, or how you manage the conditions for a client. Like, that's a technical change versus an adaptive change is the way you think about a client. Those philosophical pieces, or changing the way you respond to clients when they say certain things, and you're becoming more strength-based focused. Like, technical versus adaptive, I think for me, the technical challenges sometimes are the technical changes are a little challenging because I have to remember a lot. And I'm such an adaptive changer that I lean towards that side. So when it comes to the technical pieces, I'm always like, what do I have to do? Oh yeah, what? So that would be I would say the most challenging part.
I'd say on kind of a more basic level for me when I was an officer was the level of decisions that we have to make, or the impact the decisions we make can have on people's lives. Again, at the end of the day, we're public safety as well. And there's times where we have to make the recommendation for someone to serve a long sentence, whether it be in jail or prison. Yeah. And if you're making the decision to take someone's freedom away for any given amount of time, and especially when you're talking about, 4, 5, 10-year prison sentences, and you're standing shoulder to shoulder in court, arguing your reasoning for that decision that you've made, that can be stressful. You've gone through the process up to that point. You've made the decision. You feel confident in your decision, but you're making a decision that's obviously has a great impact on someone else's life. A decision that should not be taken lightly. Right.
Yeah. The decisions we make definitely impact other people's lives. And so when I used to write pre-sentence investigations, I always used to take that very seriously for the same reasons that Brandon just mentioned. Also because like those documents don't go away. So when you write someone's sentencing, essentially, or recommendations for that, or you're writing about their life story or history, I remember taking it so seriously because I'm saying my name will forever be on this report. And if somebody needs to go back to this, I want them to know that it was well written, but that it was done with fairness and justice, that it wasn't biased in any way. And so we do have to take our job seriously because, as I mentioned too, our can end up on the news. So we're not trying to be high profile.
No.
It's not the goal. All right. And then the miscellaneous questions. And I think these are the last few questions that we have. Are there very many people who put you in harm's way during your days at work?
I'm one of the trainers with our safety trainers that we all as officers go through. we have a lot of training that we go through to try and avoid that situation. We have training that helps us make decisions in the heat of the moment, but we also, the majority of the training and the focus of the training really is what can you do prior to that point to help ensure that you don't find yourself in a situation where someone's trying to put you in harm's way. Does it, or can it happen? Of course it can happen. We all see the news and it happens occasionally. In Dakota County, I would say it would be more likely, well, anywhere, not just Dakota County, but anywhere, it would be more likely for stuff like that to occur in a facility. So in the Juvenile Service Center, not that it happens often at all, but if it does happen, it's more likely going to be in a facility setting than in a community-based situation.
Right. Or in the adult jail in Hastings. So yeah, it's, I would say just day-to-day work. I don't ever feel like I'm in harm's way or that somebody would put me in harm's way. We're usually surrounded by deputy sheriffs anyway that secure our building. And we all have our own training as well. As Brandon mentioned, he's a trainer for our safety training. So I would say generally we're not feeling like we're in harm's way. We do have to be a lot more cautious when we go on field visits though, into clients' homes. And so we're never alone when we do that. We always go with at least one other probation officer, and we're using our tactical skills to make sure those are successful meetings.
And we have a lot of stuff a lot of procedures and policy that are in place right now to minimize the likelihood of something happening. So I think I don't think it's a coincidence that we don't have that happen. I think that decisions have been made and things have been implemented to decrease the likelihood of that happening.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What are some things you would change about the current correction system? Another loaded question.
Yeah, that's a big one. I would say that we're moving in a positive direction for sure. I say oftentimes to the social work students that I work with that we're implementing a lot of things that are moving in a right direction. Are we there? No. Mm-hmm. But is there a greater degree of good intentions in where we're going? I personally think so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for me, it would be more about like the diversity, racial disparities and things like that, societal disparities and whatnot that we see with our clients or in their jail system or our prisons, where you might see a higher number of minorities in the prison system than not, but without valid reason or so, or the different types of sentencing orders, things like that. I think over time we have made a lot of improvements because those things have been pointed out, but I think we still have a long ways to go to make some of those changes. Also, in regards to clients that struggle more with mental health, to stop treating them less like criminals or offenders and treating them like clients. I think a lot of times the courts, and I would even say maybe even, I won't say, well, the courts, and I would just even say other agencies or departments or arenas, just to kind of work on that philosophical change overall. Mm. Yeah.
What are effects of incarceration on a prisoner? Are there programs for rehabilitation for the people in the prison or the jail, and when they come out or just outside?
That's another great question. So the effects of incarceration is definitely becoming institutionalized. That's the term that's used, meaning that they're still functioning in the community as if they were in prison. So they're non-trusting of others, or they might find a group of people who are the best they could find to hang out with, even though we would consider that antisocial companions, people that you shouldn't be hanging out with, or those negative influences. Those are some of the negative impacts. Some of the positive impacts, I would say, or effects could be that sometimes they come out and they have a lot of structure in their life because they're so used to that structure that they actually want to work with probation. Some clients are like that, where they're like, I want to maintain this structure. I want my freedom, but I still need to maintain that structure because otherwise, if I don't, I'm going to go to the left or to the right, and I don't want to do that. I would also say it's harder for them once they get out to find housing, employment, because they're coming out from a felony offense, and they typically have more than one felony on their record. Not always, but that's typically the case. So it's harder for them to really reacclimate to society. And so are there programs in place for rehabilitation? Absolutely. There are programs that start in the prison and that are in the community and also corrections. And so, for instance, we have the RAP team, or RAP, the Reentry Assistance Program. And that program is designed specifically for clients in prison and coming out of the jail to be connected as much as possible to community services that they need. And it is extremely valuable to our department.
There's actually 2 other programs in Dakota County that been around for a little while that kind of speak directly to that incarceration and what it does to a person. So we have the JDAI, the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, and the ADAI, the Adult Detention Alternatives Initiative. And those are 2 plans or 2 programs that are in place to try and keep people out of jail. The idea is that you're creating or finding positive alternative placements in the community where that person can get their needs addressed without having to go to jail when it's a good fit.
Excuse me, I was coughing. And those have actually been proven to be very effective over time. So, excuse me. Sorry about that, got a dry. So I'll stop talking. And then we wanted to finally just say thank you so much for your time, for listening to us today. We know that the presentation is a little long, but I'm thinking if you can split it into 2 segments, you'll have your first part that's going to focus primarily on the system of community corrections. And then the second part is going to address all of the questions that you've had. So we hope that Brandon and I were able to successfully answer your questions, that we have intrigued you and interest you even more into coming into the field of community corrections.
And if you have any questions at all, feel free to contact either one of us. And we'd be more than happy at any point to continue the conversation or answer specific questions that you may have. So feel free to reach out to us if anything comes up.
Yes,
thank you.
More than enough to help you. So thank you so much, you guys. Have a great night.